It's Jim Check with KelownaNow. I'm here with Jesse Zeman from the BC Wildlife Federation. We're going to talk about wildfires and wildlife. Eh?
Sounds good.
So, Jasper situation, that was you sent out a press release on that, and some of the. Why don't you just tell us about that situation?
Sure. Yeah. I think Jasper was the West Kelowna of last year. It was the Kelowna of 20 years ago. It doesn't come as a surprise to a lot of us who are well versed in this and have some experience in it. This is the way of the future. Until our provincial and federal governments really get serious about managing our forests properly to help protect people's homes and take care of wildlife, we're going to continue to have these big wildfires.
And you speak from personal experience. You lost your home.
Yeah, we did. It was, last year, just about to the day, I guess, tomorrow. And we had done a series of interviews.
An anniversary of,
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we had done interviews 2 days prior to our house burning down saying, hey, this is 20 years in Kelowna. Nothing really has changed. Things are getting worse. And and then our house burned down 2 days later.
So what is the BC Wildlife Federation doing to kind of bring awareness to this, and how does it impact wildlife?
Sure. Yeah. So we do a whole bunch of advocacy, outreach, communications, of course, press releases, but we're also, funding and supporting, along with partners, controlled and prescribed burns across the province. And so our challenge in BC is we have all of this fuel loading that's sitting on the forest floor. This problem gets bigger every year. Where we live, where we're looking outside the window right now, you're going to have a burn interval of 5 to 15 years typically, sometimes 30 years. And so when you think back about putting out fires for over 100 years, we have a lot of stuff sitting on the forest floor and a whole bunch of trees that don't belong in the forest that we got to start managing. Because what we saw last year is if we allow all of this fuel to continue to build and we keep putting out fires, when we do have fires, they're going to be completely out of control.
Yeah, the 2003 fire, the Auditor General did warn about the fuel load in that fire too, and saying the pine needles stack underneath the trees was quite high, because trees are naturally kind of prevent themselves from being destroyed in a fire if it just flashes through, right? But it's when that heavy fuel load's on the bottom there, when it gets too hot, then the trees actually start to candle.
Yeah, a lot of our forests here, especially in the central Okanagan, you would have had a bunch of really big old trees that had fire scars on them that survived. And those younger trees that we see coming up, they would get killed off during a fire, right? Yeah. During a controlled burn or prescribed burn or a cultural burn, those things get killed off. And so our forests shouldn't actually look the way they do. It should be, when we're close to the central part of the valley and close to the lake, it should be a bunch of really big trees that have stood, for hundreds of years. And then really those small trees should be gone. And then it's just grasslands in a lot of the places. And grassland fires, they move quick, but they're really easy to
flash through, right?
Yeah, they're really easy to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So the fire in Jasper, again, a bunch of homes destroyed. And then there was a bunch of, even I think the mayor of that city was asking for them to take out the old, pine kill and stuff like that too, and then pine beetle kill is another problem, right? How do we get more of that going? Because I've talked to forestry companies here too, and they say they can't even get permits to cut down pine beetle kill and old birdwood.
Yeah, and so the salvage post-fire, that's a whole different discussion, but the pre-fire thing is really about managing these fuel loads and thinking about managing them. And I think one of the challenges is, I think as an elected official, you just hope it doesn't happen in your 4-year cycle. Right? So it's one of those things that doesn't happen every single year, but when it happens, it's really bad. I mean, of course, now we're 5 years of almost record fires every single year. And so the way to deal with that is to actually set objectives to say, we're going to treat this many hectares per year in British Columbia. So we're going to treat 10,000 hectares per year to help mitigate, forest fires and their effects, and also to take care of wildlife. Because the other part of this for the Wildlife Federation is all of our wildlife here evolve with fire. So they're used to it. They actually like fire. The native species and even some of our plant species, they won't even germinate without fire. So this whole place is designed.
Mother Nature kind of cleans up and everything, new growth comes underneath it, right?
So a lot of our species are, they literally evolved in this, and this is what they're set up for is, every 5 to 15 or 30 years, having a fire that goes through that's not super hot, that doesn't nuke the landscape, and they thrive in that. And so, on the wildlife end and on protecting people's properties, the more we can get ahead of this, the better off we'll all be.
So a buffer zone around our interfaces is really what we're looking for, maybe planting more deciduous trees to replace the pines in around people's homes, right?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of these places, we shouldn't even have trees, or not the extent that we have, right? So a lot of it is going to be getting fire on the ground and just putting it on consistently and getting good at fire. That's the other part that we're missing is there's a big turnover in the bureaucracy that's happening around attrition, which is happening all over the place. But the other piece is, we have for decades been really building our strength at putting out fires rather than actually having controlled fires.
Yeah. So deciduous trees typically don't burn though, right? You can put...
Yeah, they can be natural fire breaks, and you'll see that in some of the wetter, cooler places where deciduous forests definitely are kind of a sanctuary, and they help slow down fires. And so it would depend on the ecosystem. A lot of our stuff in the Okanagan, I mean, especially down south, it's basically a desert. It's a dry system. There shouldn't be a ton of trees in those areas, and so
sagebrush basically.
Yeah,
right?
sage
flash
and grassland,
kind of thing, right?
and even the sagebrush. Like sagebrush in a lot of these places, we should not have the sage we do. In places like Kamloops and even down in the South Okanagan, they're not sagebrush. We call them sage trees because they're 6 feet high, right? And so that also adds to fuel load. So even our concept of what those places look like is not necessarily natural.
So what do animals typically do when there's a fire? How do they protect themselves?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we have a big project in the Okanagan called the Southern Interior Mule Deer Project, and we had a bunch of deer that were collared. And the mule deer that were collared last year went away from the fire, and they came back 2 days later.
So they're just like, hey, it's all good?
They seem to be pretty good. I mean, obviously you're going to have some loss. The slower moving animals are definitely going to get burned up.
Or if they get caught and it kind of like goes around them kind of thing.
Yeah. And you'll get bears that get burned like individual animals, but generally speaking, the ecosystem is better off in the long run after the fire rather than putting the fire out. So wildlife in these areas thrive after fire, especially fire that's not too severe.
Yeah, I think we've seen some pictures from Jasper with bears walking around. The ground is still smoking in there. Kind of trudging around in there.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So is there something that your organization does to help animals during fires? Is there, I guess there's not much you can do. But.
No, it's, and that's kind of like, there's a difference between taking care of wildlife broadly and then taking care of an individual animal. And I think, controlled burns, prescribed burns, cultural burns, they help take care of wildlife broadly, right? So that's a brighter future for everyone. It's a brighter future for people that have houses and property. And so that's where we tend to focus our energy on, recognizing, you can't have everything, you don't get everything you want in life. Right. And so it's like, what's the best option? So
from a personal perspective, you lost your home. Is that your new home? Are you building, or where are you at with your home?
Yeah, we haven't even started rebuilding. We have not worked through the process with insurance yet, and so that
we're hearing a lot of that it's slow going.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it sure, talking to our neighbors, it sure seems like the province or the government of Canada is going to have to step in and start holding insurance companies to account, because we've been out for close to a year, and we're not even close to being able to start rebuilding. So we're going to be out for at least 2 years.
Because it seems like in 2003 that they were pretty responsive, and I think there's a lot of media attention at that time, and a lot of people ended up in bigger homes and stuff like that. But I think there's been some pushback from insurance companies to kind of like even the amount that they're insuring and stuff like that is.
Yeah, and I mean, and even for folks that have good insurance policies that should be moving quickly, things aren't. And so, I think there needs to be more regulation on that industry, because there's, quite frankly, no excuse for having people displaced, like the people in Lytton, where nothing's even started.
Yeah, that's been a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, for
almost
years.
3, I think.
Right? 3 years, yeah. Like you pay into insurance, it's not cheap. There's an expectation that if you have a major catastrophic loss, that the insurance company is there to support you. And I think, in Kelowna and West Kelowna, a lot of people are experiencing is that the insurance companies aren't there.
What are they telling you? Like, what's the reason? Because obviously you must be getting frustrated and making some phone calls and doing some stuff.
Yeah, and now it's, Jasper, and there was a hailstorm in Calgary, and there's stuff going on in Montreal. I mean...
But how does that affect you?
Right.
So my question would be like, okay, so that's great, but like now what?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of out of tools in the toolbox, and quite frankly, this is not what anybody expected.
So they're not saying they're not going to insure you, I take it, to this point?
Right, yeah, no, I mean, for people that have good insurance policies, like, they are going to have to pay out those policies, but they are just going as slowly as they possibly can dealing with it. And so, there's a bunch of people who are very upset at the lack of progress on their claims.
So when you do rebuild, will you take different steps for what's around your home as far as?
Yeah, and so that's interesting in our case is we had trees cleared behind our property for, I don't know, at least a few 100 feet, and the fire came down the hillside so quickly and so severely that there were a whole bunch
so
of big
hot,
fir trees. It actually, the wind tipped them over before they got burned. So that's how hard it came down our place, and right beside our property is all Crown land. Right. And, essentially the province was absent on that piece of land. And so in our case, yeah, there are steps we will take, but our challenge is if there's an absent landowner right beside us, being the province of BC, we can't do anything on that land. And so the irony of where our place burnt is, the BC Wildlife Federation tried to get a prescribed burn in that area 10 years ago and the province said no. So there were people who wanted to deal with this to take care of wildlife. The province said, no, you can't do it. And here we are now.
Do you think the attitude's changing in that, or are we stuck with the same kind of attitude?
Yeah, I think the provinces, they're making their strives. Like in the minister's mandate letter for forests, there was a thing around the number of burns that they want to do. The challenge is the number of burns is not meaningful. The number of hectares that we burn is meaningful, right? So rather than saying we're going to have 40 prescribed burns this year, they should be saying we're going to burn 10,000 hectares this year.
Right, because you could have 40 little tiny.
That's what you end up with. Yeah. You end up with things that are postage stamp all across the landscape, and it's meaningless.
Yeah, I've heard from some people saying that the amount of money that's allocated towards mitigation is very small compared to what's been done for actually fighting fires. And then some people are saying it's mainly because you get federal aid when you're actually fighting fires, but no federal aid when you're mitigating.
Yeah, and I think the other piece to that is pictures of water bombers and of wildfires are attractive and they get press releases and they get a lot of media. People going out and cutting down small trees and piling them and brushing them is hard, multi-decadal work. That is not sexy to elected officials. It's just not. And so they want to be able to say, we just freed up $500 million in Ottawa and we're going to send out a bunch of water bombers. But at that point, it's too late, right? At that point, you have a patient who is literally on their deathbed and you could have told them 20 years before that, hey, here are the steps you need to take in your life so that you do not end up in this position.
I mean, we're hearing the same frustrations from forestry companies saying they're not allocated the wood that they need to operate, that they could manage these forests. They say the forests are too old in BC. And in other countries, they point to New Zealand and Finland, where they say the forests are young, the average age is younger, and they have very little forest fires.
Yeah, and so that's a nuanced conversation. I mean, where, when we look out the window, where we want to protect people's property and take care of wildlife are not necessarily places where we want a monoculture of pine that turns over every 20 to 30 years. These are areas where we want to go in and thin out the forest, but that may actually require subsidies from the provincial government to do that, because in a lot of those areas, let's face it, ponderosa pine is not a super merchantable timber, right? So it's, again, the question is, what is your objective? And I think from our perspective, our objective is to take care of wildlife. Our objective is to help, reduce the risk to people's property. And that will require both levels of government coming in and saying, hey, industry, we know that you're not going to make money at this, so we're going to have to help offset this, because the timber values in a lot of these places close to the lake and in high risk fires, it's not Douglas fir that everybody wants. It's going to be these big, ponderosa pines and stuff that's really not that merchantable. So, they're different purposes.
Wood pellets, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can you can turn them into hog fuel. You can do all that stuff. It's just that quite often the economic case is not there, and that's why it doesn't get that attention from the licensees.
Well, I thank you for coming in today, and hopefully you find some resolution on your property as well. Maybe you can update us on that when something happens. Is that the same thing for a lot of people out there, or is anybody getting moving?
Yeah, so it's super variable. I mean, there's people who have houses with roofs on them already, and there's people who are not even through the process. And I think it's very clear that the insurance companies, it's not just one company, it's very clear that the insurance company are not doing their best on behalf of the policyholders. And I think that's where, again, the only people who can step in to regulate it are the federal and provincial politicians.
Okay. Well, I thank you for coming in today, and I thank you for watching Kelowna Now.